Go right ahead.
My father owned a house in Woodside where I lived a good deal of my life. We had moved there from the Bronx when I was 7, and I lived there till I went to college and moved out, when I was in my 20s. During that time, the house was a two-family house, and he had a tenant upstairs whose name was Lore, Lore. It was a husband and wife and a child, and they got a divorce. So the wife stayed in the apartment, and she would be going out and partying with men, bringing them home. And my father was getting very upset because she was bringing different guys home all the time, which was perfectly natural for her. But my father was totally outraged about it because, she had all these guys she was fucking, and my father was very conventional, respectable, and he was getting really crazy about it. So I tried to figure out how we could get her moved out of that apartment, which was rent controlled in those days.
Meaning, for those who don't know,
Meaning you could not evict the tenant. You had to offer him a new lease every 2 years, and with whatever required increase you had, which was very small, but they could stay on almost permanently as long as they signed a new lease. So I tried to figure out how I could work it out so that my father would not be so upset by evicting her from her apartment. And I finally figured out what to do. I decided, and at the same time, Louis had gotten married. My dear friend, like my brother, Louis Sarro, who I grew up with, had gotten married, and he was living in the basement of his parents' house, who had moved to 66th Street across Queens Boulevard in Maspeth. And Louis and Margie were living in the basement apartment, sleeping in his old bedroom, and it was miserable for Margie because she already had given birth to Deborah, their first child, and they were living really in squalid conditions. They had a kitchen in the basement, and she had a cook for Louis, and they were really suffering there. So I came up with a plan that would solve Louis' problem and would solve my father's problem. I called up Jack Chatterton, our attorney. I said, Jack, I want you to transfer ownership of my parents' house to Louis and Margie Sarro. He said, are they buying the house? I said, no, I just want them to take over the ownership. He says, well, what if is there money involved? I said, no, there's no money involved. I just want to transfer ownership to Louis and Margie. And he said, well, how can you trust them? I said, Louis is like my brother. He says, okay, but what if something happens to Louis? How can you trust Margie? I said, I trust Margie more than I trust Louis. She's so dependable. And she's such a good Catholic.
And you trust Louis with your life already.
And I already trust Louis with my life. So he did it. He transferred title. Little time passed. We sued Miss Laura at whatever the agency was,
right.
Rent control, for Louis and Margie to take possession of Vera Laura's apartment, which was a 2-bedroom.
Mm.
And when we went to the hearing, Margie came, and Laura was there, and she kept telling the administrator, there's something fishy going on here. These people are know each other. They're friends with each other. But come what may, we got a ruling. She got evicted, and Louis and Margie moved into the second apartment in my parents' house, which was perfect because I wasn't living there anymore. I was in the city, and Louis was like their third son. And Louis would take care of everything because by that time we had bought the house next door, 4121. And so Louis would always take care of everything around the house like a third son. And they were perfectly happy, and they started having more children. And they had Bobby and Frankie and Louie and whatever. And before you knew it, they had too many children to be living in that apartment upstairs. So we found a house on 67th Street on the other side of Woodside Avenue, and they bought it. It was a one-family house, two floors and an attic, and Louis and Margie moved there with their children. And Louis and Margie being a devout Catholic, were having children one after the other. So one day I got a phone call from Louis. Some years had passed by now, 5, 6 years. And I got a phone call from Louis, and I had been taking a nap at the time. And I got the call, and I said, "Yeah, Louis, what is it?" He says, "Hey, you Greek bastard." That's what he always called me. That was his term of affection. He says, "Hey, you Greek bastard, I got to add another floor to my house." I said, "Louis, what's happening?" He says, "I got 7 children now." And a long pause, and I had just gotten up from a nap. I said, "Wait a minute, Louis, did you say you have 7 children now?" He says, "That's right." Longer pause. I said, "Louis, why do I think you only had 5? Did I miscount?" He says, "No, you bastard, I have 7 now." Longer pause. I said, "Louis, you pulled twins?" He says, "Yes, you Greek bastard. I got to add another floor to the house." So we added a floor to Louis' house. And he went on to have 11 children.
Christ.
Now, Louis always called me a Greek bastard. Are you still recording?
Yeah.
Louis always called me a Greek bastard, which never bothered me, because I know what he was really saying is, "I love you." So at some point, Louis is calling Ada, my brother, a Greek bastard. And Ada is getting all bent out of shape because Louis is calling him a bastard. I said, "Ada, when Louis says that, he's telling you I love you. Don't you understand that?" He says, "I don't want to be called a Greek I don't want to be called a bastard." Anyway, so Louis stopped calling him a Greek bastard. But he kept calling me that.
Beautiful.
Oh, and at some point, when we had Laura out of my father's second apartment, I called Jack Chatterton, and I said, "Jack, you can transfer the house back to my parents." And he said, "Is there money involved?" I said, "No, Jack, there's no money involved. Just transfer the house from the Sarrows back to my parents." And that took care of everything.
All's well that ends well.
Yes, that was a gift I gave my father by being clever.
What was the issue your father had with Louis and the light that he never left shut?
Well, we had a workroom in the cellar of the house next door, 4121.
Yeah.
Now, 4121 had a backyard that connected to our backyard. And of course, in the front, we had entrances to both houses next to each other. So we had our tools in the cellar of 4121. So Louis would go there, take out the tools he wanted for whatever repairs he was doing on the house, and he would leave by the front of the cellar, come back to 4119, and do whatever he was taking care of. And he would leave the light on when he left. Then he would come back, and he would go down to the cellar of 4121, and the light was out. He couldn't figure that out because he left the light on because he knew he was coming back. Anyway, he came back, put the light on, took whatever tools he needed, left by the front, and went next door to do whatever he was doing for repairs. Then at some point, he comes back to 4121 to get a different tool. And he sees the light is out again. And he can't figure it out because he left the light on, knowing he probably would come back. Anyway, so he left again, but this time, as it happened, he had forgotten something, so he went back to 4121 to the cellar, and he goes in, and he finds my father putting the light down. He had come in from the back entrance each time Louis went out the front, and he would come in and shut the light and leave by the back entrance. Anyway, so Louis caught him red-handed.